This is the US Election Watch. I'm Gaurie Dwivedi. Let's take a look at headlines this evening. First up, Republican President nominee Donald Trump returns to the site of his first assassination bid. J.D. Vance and Elon Musk are set to join Donald Trump at a rally in Pennsylvania. Barack Obama to rally support for Kamala Harris across the key states. Former President Barack Obama has launched a 27-day campaign sprint for Democrat presidential nominee Kamala Harris. The latest U.S. jobs data shows that the United States added 254,000 jobs in the month of September, and the unemployment rate has fallen to 4.1%. All right, just about 4 weeks to go for the elections. Let's start the show with the latest as far as the campaigns from both the camps. Former President Donald Trump will rally in Georgia with Governor Brian Kemp. The event focused on Hurricane Helen, the damage that the hurricane has caused, and will be the first time that the two have appeared together in public since the 2020 election. Donald Trump has repeatedly disparaged Kemp for not doing enough to help him overturn his loss to Joe Biden in the crucial state of Georgia in 2020. Trump is scheduled to campaign later on Friday in North Carolina. Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris is scheduled to return to Michigan, and former President Barack Obama also announced that he will campaign for Vice President Harris in the month leading up to the election day, kicking off his efforts with a trip to Pittsburgh on Thursday, as far as the latest reports show. All right, shifting focus now to the first big story that we are discussing on the show. Well, former President Donald Trump is set to return to the site where he nearly lost his life in July, holding a rally on the 5th of October, and his campaign and allies have hyped up as one of the biggest opportunities to boost his candidacy in the final weeks of the presidential race. Donald Trump's rally in Butler, in Pennsylvania, where he was shot in the ear by an assassin who killed a rally-goer and injured others, will give him a spotlight for one of his rallies that has been more difficult for him to grab in recent years. Elon Musk said he would attend the rally that Donald Trump is holding on Saturday in Butler in Pennsylvania, the setting of the first assassination attempt on the former president. In a post late Thursday, New York time, on his social platform X, the billionaire wrote, "I will be there to support," in response to the Republican presidential nominee's post about his return to this site. Let's get in Caroline Malone to give us the very latest as far as what's happening on ground. Caroline, let me start by asking you the kind of, and I'm assuming that there would be unprecedented security measures that would be put in place, because this was the site where that assassination bid took place on Donald Trump.
Well, absolutely. Security is definitely being increased since that first attempted assassination on Donald Trump back in July. At the time, his security detail included the Secret Service, and they had a team in place that is appropriate for candidates for president. That is an agreed level. However, since there have been not just the Butler attempted assassination, but another one at a golf course where Trump was playing golf just last month, there's been widespread agreement to increase Trump's Secret Service protection detail to a level that's more on par with the kind of risk that he is currently seeing. On top of that, members of the House and Senate in Congress have agreed in a bipartisan way, which is quite unusual these days, but across the political aisle, to increase funding for the Secret Service in general. So they've increased by tens of millions of dollars for this group that is so crucial in protecting political candidates. And it's not just Trump that is, under threat from these types of risks. We know in the past years, for instance, the former House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi's husband, was actually attacked in their own home. It seems that the target of the attack was meant to be Nancy Pelosi. Fortunately, her husband survived the attack and things have moved on. But, this Butler, Pennsylvania rally that Trump is going to be going to on Saturday, he will be at the same place where that first attempted assassination happened. Of course, Trump survived. He got a graze on his ear and there was blood coming out of his ear. He was injured. But someone else did die in that rally and other people were injured in that rally. And some of those people who were hurt and some of the first responders are going to be attending again on Saturday. So it shows a remembrance of some sorts as to what happened in July.
And as far as the Trump campaign is concerned, how do you see that? Because of course the effort here is, the messaging here is to project him as a strong leader, especially in the wake of all that's happening in the world. Given that there is a serious tension as far as the Middle East is concerned, the Trump campaign is definitely trying to project him as this very strong leader. Is that how you read it?
Absolutely. Well, you're right there. The strong leader aspect is an important one, and particularly for the types of voters that have come out actively in support of Trump. That's something that resonates with them. It's seen as important to them. After this first assassination attempt in Pennsylvania in July, there was, although it was of course a tragic incident, there was what can be described as an iconic image of Trump in which he had blood coming out of his ear, but he had his fist raised up while he was being dragged off the stage by the Secret Service. That was definitely a memorable moment from that event. And it's one in which people have responded to positively, saying, this shows the type of person that Trump is, strong despite the risks against him. Now, of course, he does need this increased security, but he is trying to, in some ways, show how strong he is. It's advantageous for his campaign for him to return to the scene of that crime from July and show that he's essentially not afraid, despite the fact he does need to have this increased security detail. It's going to be important as well to, remember the people that were affected outside of Trump, because this was, very much a wide event and was quite catastrophic for people in Butler.
Absolutely, Caroline, we leave it there. Thanks much for taking out the time and speaking to me on this very special show. In fact, let's move on to some very important update coming in. Former Representative Liz Cheney, the highest profile Republican to come out openly in support for the Democrat presidential nominee, which is Vice President Kamala Harris. She's joined her campaign trail at an event in Wisconsin, which is the birthplace of the Republican Party, in fact. Cheney's appearance with Harris is part of a concerted effort by the Democrat campaign to appeal to those Republican fence-sitters who may be disaffected by Donald Trump. Remember, there is a section of the Republican Party who feel that Donald Trump's ideas and his vision is something that they cannot align with. Cheney is the third highest ranking Republican in the House before she was ousted for voting to impeach Trump. And on Wednesday, the campaign launched a new ad featuring a direct-to-camera appeal from the two-time Trump voter in Pennsylvania who argued the former president's economic plan will not benefit working voters. The campaign is also hosting Republicans for Harris events across the battleground states this week. To discuss whether this outreach will work for the Harris campaign, let's get in a political analyst, Professor Robert Shapiro. But before that, let's get you this report that tells you why this story is so important.
I tell you, I have never voted for a Democrat, but this year I am proudly casting my vote for Vice President Kamala Harris.
Former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, one of the highest profile Republicans to announce his support for Kamala Harris, joined her on the campaign trail at an event in Wisconsin on Thursday.
Liz Cheney really is a leader who puts country above party and above self, a true patriot, and it is my profound honor to have your support.
Along with her father and former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney, Liz had announced in September that Harris would have their vote. Though they differ in their views on policy, the Cheneys and Harris share an antipathy for former President Donald Trump and see him as a threat to democracy. Cheney's appearance in support of Harris is no freak occurrence. It's part of an effort by the Harris campaign to appeal to disgruntled Republicans. The campaign launched a new ad featuring a two-time Trump voter who argues that Trump's economic plan will not benefit working voters. That's not all. as the campaign is also hosting Republicans for Harris events across the battleground states this week. Former Republican Congressman Denver Riggleman and Adam Kinzinger are involved in some of these events. During the Democratic National Convention in August, many Republican officials made their presence felt, including Kinzinger and former Trump administration official Olivia Troy. Their involvement hasn't stopped at the DNC stage, as Troy has already appeared in a Harris campaign ad, and others have been dispatched as surrogates for the campaign in recent weeks. But how does the support from an unexpected corner translate on the ground? According to a September CBS News poll, only a small number of voters who identify as conservative back Harris. On the other hand, voters who identify as moderate favor Harris over Trump by double digits. That it would be an uphill task for the Harris campaign to pull off a mass exodus from the conservative side. With Vishal Vivek, Bureau Report, NDTV World.
Okay, so will this dent Donald Trump's chances? How big is the chunk of voters who are aligned to the Republican Party but not aligned to Donald Trump? And more importantly, how many of those fence-sitters will be convinced with this narrative that the Kamala Harris campaign is putting out? Let's get in Professor Robert Shapiro to get us answers to those and a lot more. Professor Shapiro, thanks much for speaking to NDTV. My first question to you, sir, that Liz Cheney, the crossover campaigner, she's a star campaigner, in fact, with the Republican Party. How much do you think will her campaign for Kamala Harris dent Donald Trump's chances?
Well, the truth of the matter is we don't know for sure. But just to put this in perspective, this is extraordinary that these Republican leaders are coming out not only opposing Donald Trump, but supporting a Democratic candidate and actively campaigning for Harris. This is really quite an extraordinary phenomenon here. The irony here is that if Nikki Haley were the Republican candidate, we would not be having this conversation. All these Republican leaders would be strongly backing her, and it would be very difficult for Harris to win the election. It's going to be difficult for these leaders to have a big effect, because keep in mind, these are the kinds of leaders and mainstream elites that Donald Trump basically came out against, campaigned against, and to try to use that as leverage to launch his campaign originally in 2016 and to continue in this current election. These are the elite. These are the mainstream elites. For these leaders to have an effect, they'll have some effect, but for them to have a further effect, they need to persuade at least some individuals in the communities, in the 7 key battleground states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, and so forth, and to persuade individuals in those states who will then in turn campaign in their neighborhoods, in their areas, to gain support for Harris.
But she also has a fair bit of, she has a controversial background there. And do you think that may not go down well with the, traditional Democrat voters?
Well, Harris has had some difficulty right now appealing to non-white voters and gaining momentum and support from young voters. These are key constituencies for her. In recent elections, Democrats have done well in the elections when they've gotten 90% of the Black vote, 70% of the Latino vote, and Asian American vote. At this juncture, Trump has made inroads on those groups. Not enormous, but support among Blacks is below 90%. Support among Latinos is on the order of 55%. And it's important for Harris to get those numbers up. And the reason the numbers aren't up is that those voters are as disgruntled with the performance of the Biden administration as white non-college.
Indeed. Professor Shapiro, stay with us, because I want to touch upon the other big story of the show, which is about the swing states and more importantly, the Latino voter and how important that is, and who's actually getting it right. From swing states, in fact, the Harris and Trump campaigns are now focusing on appealing to the Latino voters. Both campaigns are fighting for that crucial Latino vote base in these battleground states, particularly Pennsylvania, pursuing US's second largest racial or ethnic group. But they're chasing those votes in very different ways. Donald Trump is wrapping his appeal to Latino voters in a broader message of prosperity and nostalgia for the pre-pandemic economy under his presidency, while also leaning on high-profile endorsers. And Harris's campaign is instead pouring more money into advertising. On your screens are some of those numbers. To make more of that, let's quickly play out this report. We come back and talk on this with Professor Shapiro.
Race to White House is nearly drawing to a close now, with about a month for the final verdict. Madam President or Mr. President, we will find out. But one thing is clear, that both Democrats and the Republicans are putting their best foot forward to sway the Latino voters, the nation's second largest racial or ethnic group across the battleground states. There are over 36.2 million Latinos eligible to vote in the United States. And when it comes to politics, their voices pack a serious punch. In fact, Latinos are expected to make up about 14.7% of eligible voters in November 2024, making them the second largest voting bloc behind white voters.
Well, I think my show gives people the respect that Latin people deserve. And we're going to be 36 million registered voters in this election. And Kamala Harris and all the candidates need to pay respect to that and get experts that know Latino culture, know Latino issues, and cater to us. And then you'll get our vote. That 36 million, we're going to decide who the next president is.
Trump's pitch to Latino voters often revolves around tough policies on immigration, but highlighting job creation and business opportunities. Harris, on the other hand, is pushing the importance of immigration reform, healthcare, and social justice. She is highlighting the party's work to make life easier for Latino families, like the pathway to citizenship. Harris's campaign is pouring more money and efforts into advertising, targeted messaging, and on-the-ground organizing. Since the beginning of August, Harris allies have spent $13.4 million on advertising in Hispanic media, according to AdImpact, which tracks political ads. Trump's campaign and allies have spent $609,000 million. It's a tight race. Latino voters are split between concerns about the economy and immigration. However, make no mistake, Latino voters are no monolith. Their priorities shift across regions, generations, and even gender.
This is the same individual who took out a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for the execution of 5 young Black and Latino boys who were innocent, the Central Park 5. Took out a full-page ad calling for their execution. This is the same individual who spread birther lies about the first Black president of the United States. And I think the American people want better than that, want better than this.
But the larger question, who has the upper hand here, Harris or Trump? Where do the polls hit? According to a Pew Research Center survey conducted between August 26 to September 2, 2024, a majority of Latino registered voters, 57%, say vote for Vice President Kamala Harris, and 39% say that they would vote for former President Donald Trump. Winning over new voters will be central to both Harris's and Trump's paths to victory this November, not just in Nevada or Arizona, where Latinos comprise roughly 30% of the population, but also in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, where fast-growing Latino populations could play a decisive role in tightly divided states. Ridhima Kedia for NDTV.
Professor Shapiro, I want to ask you this, that will the Latino voter actually make or break this election, as you were hearing that report telling?
Yes, I think that group is very important. Now, keep in mind, any group can matter substantially in any of the key states because the election is really going to be very, very close. Remember, Joe Biden won the 2020 election by 40,000 votes in 3 states. So that's the margin we're talking about here. As I said before, the Democrats need to get the Latino vote closer to 70% supporting them. And the one thing to keep in mind here is that Latino voters vote. They're a large number. They're the largest group of eligible voters, but they vote at lower rates than any of the groups, and particularly Latino women. And the Democratic strategy through ads and through in-person door knocking, personal
So
conversations.
you're basically saying the turnout for Latino voters is lower than the national average, and Democrats
Yes,
need to do more to bring their voter base to the polls.
That's right. And get larger percentages of support among that group. It's an important combined strategy.
Talk to us about the kind of messaging. There's been a complete contrast in how the Republicans, particularly Donald Trump, is approaching this vote bank as against how Kamala Harris's campaign is pitching. How do you see the difference? It's very stark, but how do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, Trump has the easier case to make here. In particular, Latino voters have been disgruntled with the performance of the Biden administration. They're concerned with bread and butter issues, jobs, and especially high prices, and also the cost of housing. Latino voters, in that sense, are really no different from white voters, and Trump can make a very strong case here. On the other hand, Harris is trying to make a clear, important social justice case, equality case, and so forth. And the abortion issue in particular doesn't help enormously among Latino voters, because you have Catholic voters and especially Christian Pentecostal voters in the Latino community who are pro-life, not pro-choice.
Indeed. And we have some of those numbers on our screens in terms of how significant the Latino voter base is. I want to ask you this, Professor Shapiro, you said that some of the issues are not different than the white vote bank, the white electorate as well. But what, according to you, is some of the key factors on which this very large ethnic vote bank is likely to decide? Or do you think it's not a monolith and you cannot go by one particular factor?
I think you should think about these groups in basically the same way as you think about white voters. Among highly educated, Black voters and Latino voters, they're voting disproportionately for Harris. The one thing they're reflecting on is, and this may or not be an accurate memory here, is that they think they did better when Trump was president than when Biden is president. And that's the same kind of message that resonates with the white community as well. And the white community is not monolithic, and we've now seen that the Hispanic, Black, and Asian American community is not monolithic either.
So then would you say then economy is really the overarching issue? It doesn't matter whether you decide it on ethnicity or race. It's essentially economy which is the overarching issue here.
Yes, I think that's the best explanation for why Trump has been doing better than one might expect among Latino voters. And there are lots of reports and anecdotal information about this, where you hear this kind of rhetoric coming out of the Latino community.
All right, Professor Shapiro, thanks much for speaking to NDTV. Robert Shapiro, Professor of Political Science and in the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. With that, we've come to the very end of this edition of US Election Watch. Thanks so much for watching.